When we last left the Claib Jones Autobiography, he had just made his way to Hindman, Kentucky, to swear out a warrant against all those that had a hand in the murder of Frank Saylers. He had been turned away by the sheriff and the county officials concerning the arrest, and turned to Dick Vance for help. Now we pick up with Claib's telling of how Vance became part of the feud. In this section of the story, we will speak about the mistaken identities, the missed opportunities that could have ended the feud a lot quicker than it did. However, we will end today with the shootout at Fort Bates and how Todd Hall was wounded. In our Feud series, we will talk about this part of the battle from the newspaper of the day's perspective and how close or far away Claib Jones is to retelling of the events. All aboard the Kentucky-Tennessee Living Time Machine. Please fasten your seatbelts and keep your arms and legs inside of the vehicle at all times. But to get going, we need your help. We still need to fire up the time machine to transport us. Please help us by clicking on the like, subscribe, and bell notification buttons down below. Not only does this fire up the time machine, but it convinces YouTube that we need a bigger time machine to reach more people who love history as much as you do. Now, back to our story. Mistaken identity. The Hall clan had tried to get rid of Vance earlier, so there was bad feelings between the Halls and Dick Vance. The trouble started when Vance and the Halls were in Catlettsburg, Kentucky, because they were attending a federal court to face charges of moonshining. Here is how the events went down. Vance was staying at the Catlettsburg Hotel while he was in town facing the charges. Vance was sharing a room and bed with John Adams to save money. A spy of Hall's went into the room that Vance was staying in, lit a match, and recognized the man laying on the bed to be Vance. Vance was not asleep, and immediately upon leaving the spy, got up and went into a separate part of the hotel to find a bed to lay down in. The spy returned with Todd Hall, Uriah Bates, and Andy Hall. The men did not use a match to recognize the man again, but grabbed a hold of the man in the dark and hurled him out of the third-story window in the room in which he was staying to the brick pavement down below. John Adams of Letcher County immediately died upon impact. Upon the return of Vance to Knott County from the federal court, Vance waylaid and shot Andy Hall from a hidden spot in the bush. Jones felt that Vance would make a great ally in the fight with the Hall clan, as Vance was already expecting trouble from them. Missed opportunity. With warrants in hand, Vance gathered up some men and loaned Jones some guns, and they headed off toward Fort Bates to arrest Hall and his gang of outlaws. When they got closer to the fort, they spotted Todd Hall sitting in his yard reading a newspaper. Seizing the opportunity, the men grabbed their guns and lay down on the ground and began inching their way toward the unsuspecting man. They got to within 40 yards of Hall and were ready to begin to shoot him when it began to snow, and Todd Hall got up and went into the fort. Frustrated, the Jones-Vance party left the scene and went to Jones' cabin to wait out the snowstorm. Somehow the next day, the word had gotten back that Jones was back home and had warrants in hand. Todd Hall and his gang moved their headquarters from Fort Bates to Fort Wright for safety. Second missed opportunity. Finding out that Hall had moved his men over to Wright's for safety, Claib told his wife to tell everyone that he had went to Ohio. It did not take long for Hall to bring his men back to Fort Bates when he thought it was safe to do so. Vance and Jones then took to the bush and hurried to Fort Bates. They took their stand near the forks of the branch just above the fort, and in no time at all, here come Todd Hall and Willie Bates driving 2 yoked oxen that had belonged to Frank Saylers. Vance was not sure of their identity, and so he let them pass. As it turned out, Jones and Vance had went up the creek to German Isaac's home. Isaacs and his wife both told the men that Hall had just went up the road driving Saylers' oxen and wearing Saylers' clothes. This is why Vance did not recognize him as being Todd Hall. Isaacs further informed the men that Hall had driven his brother, Martin Isaacs, out of his own home and was now trying to kill him. He informed Jones and Vance where he could find Martin. Jones was then given 5 more men for the arrest of Hall from the Isaacs. The Fort Bates Shootout. After all the men and guns were gathered, it was time to go to Fort Bates. Everyone was in the house, but there was something odd about the appearance of the area. Nell Bates, Todd Hall's sister, walked out of the house, walked to the road, looked up and down the road, walked around the house, and then up the hill. Soon afterward, Bill Bates and Black Hawk Sizemore came out of the fort and went up to the barn. Then, all of a sudden, Hall and his men came out of the back door in a run. As soon as they got into range, Jones ordered their surrender. The men made ready for battle, but Jones shot Todd Hall first in the shoulder and knocked him down. He got back on his feet and staggered toward the fort. His sister Nell grabbed him and pulled him into the fort by the back door. Shots rang out of the fort for quite a while. In the middle of the battle, Todd Hall's wife came out of the fort onto the porch, climbed onto a fence, and exclaimed, quote, "Hurrah for old Claib Jones! Kill all of them, and that damn Saylers woman too," unquote. Jones called back to her saying that it was what he was intending to do. The fight continued, but the ammo that the Vance-Jones side was using would not penetrate the logs of the fort. Mac Hall was with Jones and his side, and he was wounded and died a few days later. Hall and his men slipped out and left the fort that night. The next day, on Jack's Creek in Floyd County, Hall and his men waylaid and killed Abner Little, who was the constable who was with Jones at the attack of Fort Bates. Hall and his men fled for Fort Wright on Elkhorn. Jones and 3 of his men went to Cincinnati to buy 37 Winchesters and return to Knott County. Upon their return, the jailer of Knott County, Isom Sloan, and Deputy Letcher County Dolph Drawn swore out warrants on Claib Jones, Dick Vance, and the rest of their party for wounding Todd Hall and others in the shootout. The men gave their bond to get out of jail. The governor of the state of Kentucky offered a reward of $500 for the capture and arrest of Todd Hall and each of his men. Jones was appointed as special bailiff to arrest them. And here we will leave the Claib Jones and his men as they prepare to lay siege against Todd Hall and his men. In the next section, John Wright will become involved in this conflict. Then we will see the siege of Fort Wright and the arrest of Hall's men. A special thank you. We wish to once again thank those who have helped us to gather information about the people in this series. We at Kentucky Tennessee Living could not do the amount of research and storytelling that we do without the help of some great historians and friends. We have a special list of people today that we wish to thank. A special thank you goes to Anthony Blair and Vicki McPeak Stackett. Another very special thank you goes to Charlotte Hicks Cottle for her help with the Jones family. Thank you. We at Kentucky Tennessee Living would like to thank you for watching our video series on the Appalachian Outlaws. Don't forget to hit that like button, as the more likes we receive, the more likely YouTube is to suggest our videos to other viewers. Also, to receive notice when we upload a new video, be sure to subscribe and click the bell notifications button. We thank you for continuing to support Kentucky Tennessee Living as we are discovering the mysteries of Appalachian history.